Welcome to the Motorcycle Hall of Fame Museum, and particularly the dedication of the Heroes of Harley-Davidson exhibit. I think the Harley-Davidson Motor Company has done a great job of letting us know for at least the last 10 years that they were going to have a centennial, that their 100th anniversary was coming at us. More than perhaps any other corporation in America, we've known for over 10 years this was going to happen. That prompted this museum to think about a way to honor the motor company. But the Harley corporate story is so well known. You can read about them in U.S. News and World Report, Wall Street Journal. They're a model American corporate story. Rising from the ashes of the 80s, good work of guys like Von Beals brought them back. So we looked for a special angle. The people? Perhaps. Harley people. But mainly the heroes, because there's so many people that ride Harley-Davidson. People that did important things related to Harley motorcycles. Hopefully, we hold for you what time is taken away.
We have put here in the lobby what I will call eye candy, some motorcycles that were selected to get people's attention and be very attractive. A 1906 Harley-Davidson, the first year that they used the Renault Gray, and the first year that they put serial numbers on the engine. Only 11 Harleys were built before 1906. And 1906 was really the year they became a commercial going firm. They ramped up their production to 50 units, and that is an example of an 06. Overhead is a replica of one of Evel Knievel's jumping bikes. He had 4 XRs that were maintained by Roger Riemann. This one is like the one Knievel used when he jumped the buses at Wembley Stadium in front of 90,000 people and on live television. And then to the right is what is arguably the most famous motorcycle on earth, the 1969 chopper from the movie Easy Riders. Again, this one is a replica, but a very well done replica. Interesting story about this, there were 2 of those machines built for the motion picture. One was totally destroyed in the final scene. That one was retrieved and restored and put back together by the actor that played Grizzly Adams. The second machine was stolen from a storage facility, and to this day, no one knows where it is or who took it. When we decided that we needed to do an exhibit to celebrate Harley-Davidson's 100th anniversary, the question was, what were we going to do that would be unique and different and work with the Motorcycle Hall of Fame Museum? You kind of get your cue from a statement that CEO Rich Tierlink made in the foreword of his book. People are a company's only sustainable competitive advantage. He believed that. We decided that what we wanted to talk about, in addition to the history and the technology, was the people, both inside and outside the company, that have made Harley-Davidson famous, helped it survive 100 years. So thus our exhibit titled Heroes of Harley-Davidson. The concept was created by Mark Modersky. We decided to focus on people.
This exhibit is probably our deepest, most developed product so far. Our last exhibit was Century of Indian, and it talked about a brand over a period of about 100 years. A lot to do with the manufacturing, the machines, circumstances, political and social, around manufacturing in America that influenced Indian and how things went. This exhibit is about people, the heroes of Harley-Davidson. These men and women may have ridden other brands before, but at some point in their life, their riding interest intersected with a Harley-Davidson motorcycle, and that's what we're examining here. They might be racers, they might be cross-country riders, any sort of work, tuners, but we're talking about the people, and we all like people, certain kinds of people at least, and there's more interest there, I think, more dynamics, you might say, when you're looking at the people than if you're just looking at the piece of hardware.
Now, this is a replica of the first Harley-Davidson quote factory. Arthur Davidson and his next door neighbor, Bill Harley, started tinkering to try to build a motor bicycle to get them to the fishing hole quicker. And the Davidsons got so tired of them tracking mud and dirt and grease into the house that they built a 10-foot by 15-foot shed in the backyard of the Davidson home in Milwaukee. That is exactly the size of this shed, and this is what it looked like. The fact is, no one knows what was in the shed. No one knows what kind of tools they had to work with, whether they had electricity. And what we have done is present the shed and put in it the type of hand and machine tools that were available at the turn of the century. You'll see a beautiful lathe in there that is on loan to us from the Henry Ford Museum. It's quite likely they never had anything like that. But these are examples of the kind of tools available at the time. And also in the shed is a replica of a 1905 Harley-Davidson. The single-cylinder Harley-Davidsons are so rare, they're so valuable as collectibles, that today you can entirely build one from reproduced parts. And this is an example of that, of a 1905 replica. We have on the wall here a historical photograph of the four founders, Arthur Davidson, Walter Davidson, Bill Harley, and Bill Davidson. It was Arthur and William Harley that started trying to build motorcycles. They were just young boys. Walter Davidson, an older brother, was already away from home working as a machinist for a railroad. He came home to join the family for the celebration of William Davidson's marriage. And at that time saw the project, got involved in it. It was Walter that actually made the thing run and took the first ride on the Harley-Davidson prototype motorcycle. Walter was so enthused about it, he quit his job in Kansas. He came back and got a similar job in Milwaukee so he could help the younger boys at night try to build motorcycles. William Davidson, the oldest of the three brothers, was the last one to actually join the company. He was already married, had a family, and in 1907 joined with the other three when Harley-Davidson was incorporated. William Harley, in the meantime, went to the University of Wisconsin at Madison and got a degree in engineering, came back and became chief engineer of the company. In modern terms, you would define their duties as Arthur Davidson, sales and marketing. He's the man that built their dealer network. Walter Davidson, administration. He was the first president of the Harley-Davidson Motor Company. William Harley, engineering. And William Davidson, production. He was in charge of running the factory.
I'm the granddaughter or the third generation of William S. Harley, who was one of the founders of Harley-Davidson. My father was John Edward Harley, and then there's me. And I have two brothers, John Edward Harley and James Patrick Harley. So we're the third generation of John and William. We're still riding, very active in the riding world, and enjoying it very much.
With all of the people we talk about in this exhibit, it was quite impossible to convey all the information we would like to. So when you see one of these blue stickers, that indicates that a full biography plus additional photographs are available online. You can either access it at one of these computers, like under the blue cube there, or you can do it from your own computer at home on the internet by going to motorcyclemuseum.org. Harley-Davidson was actually a little bit late getting into racing. They've been known for racing for many years, but the fact is Arthur Davidson was entirely opposed to factory racing. He wanted his motorcycles to be seen as serviceable tools for transportation and work, and he saw no reason to spend money racing like most of the other companies did. In fact, in his dealer newsletter in 1913, he absolutely published a tirade against racing, and he said he hoped he'd see the day when it would be outlawed. Fact is, all of his brothers didn't agree with him, and about the time he was complaining about racing, they were hiring William Ottaway from Thor. Now, in the picture behind you, the picture of the team, the man on your left is William Ottaway, a Canadian engineer who immigrated to the United States, worked for Thor, and Harley hired him to start their racing program. This is, I think, in my opinion, the best single collection of early Harley-Davidson racing bikes in the world, and it's the first time, to my knowledge, that they've been all together at one place, except for the gray model on the board track with white tires. All of the bikes in this exhibit are owned by Daniel Statnikov. The gray one with the white tires is owned by Jeff Willis here in Ohio. But Daniel Statnikov has an excellent collection of the early racers and hill climbers. Harley-Davidson's first production racer was like the two that are up on the board track. It was the 11K. It was produced in 1914, and it was based on their earlier 10E street V-twin engine. These were production racers. They were available to anyone who could buy them. Later on, the factory began to build works machines that only the works riders could use, like the ones in this exhibit. The ultimate was this model right here, the 8-valve. First built in 1916. Bill Ottaway probably was heavily involved in its design and produced into the mid-1920s. 4-valve cylinder head, extremely potent machine for the period. Harley-Davidson assembled what was at that time the most awesome racing team that had been seen in America, and it earned the name of the Harley-Davidson Wrecking Crew. They're listed here on the wall: Ralph Hepburn, Albert Shrimp Burns, Ray Weishaupt, Otto Walker, Fred Ludlow, Baldwin Jones, Jim Davis, Red Parkhurst. The team was so dominant that in 1921 they won every single race on the American National Circuit. However, in 1922, Harley-Davidson completely shut down the operation, closed down the shop, and got out of racing. They didn't do it because they won everything. They did it because in 1921 they produced their first operating deficit. The motorcycle industry had already begun to turn downward, and it was very difficult for the company to continue to sponsor such a big racing effort when they were losing money. After that, Harley-Davidson was kind of in and out of racing from time to time, up into the 30s. A lot of these guys, when Harley went out of the racing business for a year, they'd just go over and ride for Indian, like Jim Davis, and continue to make their name that way. Arguably the most accomplished racer in the history of our sport was Joe Petralli, who was not among the first group, but came along in the 1930s, raced bikes like the little white pea shooter here in the middle of the stand. Petralli is the only man to have won both national track racing and hill climbing national championships in the same year, and he did it 4 years in a row from 1932 through 36. We have on display some trophies of Otto Walker crew. He was the first man to be clocked going 100 miles an hour in a race, and his plaque from Harley-Davidson for that performance is on display. For the first time in one of our exhibits, we've included a fine arts component back in the gallery here. All Harley-Davidson and early motorcycling art, paintings by Dave Ewell, sculpture by Jeff Decker and Steve Posson. The stained glass on the window is by Ron Ray, who is a nephew of Dot Robinson. And then up front, you'll see the black and white photos of A.F. Van Order. Van Order was a very early photographer and racer, and a lot of what we know about racing in the teens and 20s, we can thank him for the fine photographs he did of the era. We've got on display here what is to me one of the most interesting aspects of Harley-Davidson history, something that's relatively little known and until recently not much talked about by the company. By the early 1930s, the motorcycle industry was in such decline, Harley-Davidson was in such trouble, that in 1932 they were down to a 2-day work week, and they built less than 4,000 motorcycles that year. They had on their shelves machine tools that weren't being used because their production was so low. At that time, they had an agent, a sales agent, named Alfred Rich Child. He was not a Harley-Davidson employee, but he was an independent agent who had the exclusive territory of Japan, Manchuria, and China. His business was going away also. War was starting in China. The yen-dollar relationship was bad, and Harley-Davidson, which did pretty good sales in the Orient prior to that, was losing its sales. Alfred Child went to Walter Davidson and said, "Look, Our business is going away. Let's salvage what we can while we can. You've got all these machine tools in Milwaukee that you're not using. Let's sell them to a Japanese company and let's license them to build a Harley-Davidson in Japan. And that's exactly what they did. Walter didn't much like the idea. He didn't think they got paid enough, and incidentally they got a total of $3,200 for licensing the motorcycle. But that's what they did, and the result is this motorcycle, the Rikuo. Direct translation of Rikuo is Land King. Most people say that what it really means is, translates as King of the Road. They licensed the company to build Rikuos for 3 years. The fact is they kept doing it. There wasn't much they could do to stop them. And this is a relatively late model. Telescopic forks, you'll notice. This is a 58. And Rikuos continued to be manufactured in Japan until early 1960s. To my knowledge, there are only 2 of these in the United States. This one is owned by George Barber, who has the museum in Alabama, and there's one other I know of on the West Coast. Now, like I said, the Harley-Davidson didn't get much money for licensing a Japanese company to build this motorcycle. But the fact is, it was a significant capital contribution that probably helped them build what turned out to be arguably the greatest motorcycle in their history, and that was the Knucklehead. Introduced in 1936, the Model EL was light years beyond anything Harley had done before. Overhead valves, recirculating oil system, and in retrospect, it has all of the styling cues that are so popular on today's Harley-Davidsons. The Knucklehead introduced the instrument console on the tank, the wraparound oil tank, and so on. We have displayed it next to a 1934 VD to demonstrate the different technology between the 2 machines, and on display also is a cutaway of the Knucklehead on loan to us from the Harley-Davidson archives. This was a high-performance engine. It changed the company's reputation. It really put them on the map, and it's probably the motorcycle that made them really step away from Indian in their rivalry with Indian and become the dominant motorcycle manufacturer in the United States. The founders, who are pictured here with a Knucklehead coming off the assembly line, and incidentally, let me add, these are both, in my way of thinking, spectacular examples. Both of these motorcycles are original paint machines, totally unrestored and all there. So they're really quite rare and valuable. The founders realized that they had a potential winner with the Knucklehead, and they set out in 1937 to prove it with world speed records. Joe Petrali, pictured here, rode a Knucklehead to 136 miles an hour at Daytona Beach, overturning a speed record that Indian had held for 12 years. And then Fred Ham at Muroc Dry Lake in California in 1937, in a 24-hour period, grabbed 44 individual speed and endurance records aboard a Knucklehead. And those kind of feats, highly publicized, helped establish the reputation of the machine. Behind me here is one of Jeff Decker's sculptures. This was commissioned by Bob Drawn, a Harley-Davidson dealer in Oakland, California. It's 100% a full-scale example of Joe Petrali and the Knucklehead at Daytona Beach. Only 6 of these have or ever will be built. This is number 6. Now, Harley-Davidson, in publicizing this world speed record, always pictures the motorcycle like this, or like this. Fact is, it didn't work. At high speeds, it went into a violent, uncontrollable wobble. What Petrali finally did was come back and tell Bill Davidson, take the streamlining off of it. They stripped the streamlining off the back, they stripped the streamlining off the front forks, and he ran the motorcycle stripped, naked, and set the speed record of 137 miles an hour. But they were quite proud of their handiwork, so they've always depicted it this way in their advertising. All of that body work was hand-hammered aluminum. This was long before fiberglass became available. Now, as we said before, in the 1930s, racing declined because of the economy and because, well, the industry by that time was down to only 2 manufacturers in the United States, and they simply couldn't afford to sponsor factory racing teams. They needed a new idea. that would get racing going again. And that idea came in 1932. It was created by the AMA and has been known as Class C. Behind you is an exhibit depicting Class C racing. The gist of Class C rules are that you can no longer run these expensive one-off factory machines. The motorcycles you race in championship competition have to be serial production machines available through a dealer. A lot of people thought the idea was stupid, controversial, Bush League, and the fact is it was Bush League compared to former factory racing. But it put hundreds of people to work in the racing business. It became very, very popular. It rekindled racing and produced some of the best champions we have had in our history. On display here are the first Class C Harley racer, the WR. This bike does not have any particular pedigree, but the next one behind it, number 98, is Joe Leonard's last KR. Behind it is Mert Lawwill's 1969 Grand National Championship bike. The orange one is Lawwill's XR with his own frame, and then two Harley-Davidson road racers. What Class C racing also did was produce some of the greatest tuning talent we have had in this country, and with that we did this exhibit called Motor Maestros. It created people like Tom Sifton, Lenny Andrus, that built machines that could beat the factory, and a lot of their ideas were later incorporated in the factory racing motorcycles. We have on display the three generations of leading Harley Class C racing engines, the WR, the KR, and the Alloy XR. There was in between these two a cast iron XR, short-lived, 2 years, was a failure. The Alloy XR has been spectacularly successful. And this is Tom Sifton's homemade original cam grinding machine. Tom became so accomplished at grinding racing cams, not just for Harley-Davidsons, but for a lot of British brands, that he finally got out of tuning and devoted his full time to building cams. And a lot of the designs used by the factory were Sifton designs that he earned that they bought and he paid or earned a licensing fee. One little special thing I'd point out is that the yellow road racer here, now owned by Dave Eastep, probably has more Daytona miles on it than any other motorcycle in history. It was ridden for years at Daytona by Tony Murguia, and one man who probably is better known for his exploits aboard an Indian also rode that motorcycle, and that's Bobby Hill standing right here. Bobby, what years did you ride that bike?
When we were forced off the Indians, I started with the first K models in, I think it was the first part of 1957 and 58. And the last race I rode was in the first race at Daytona in 59, which I finished 5th, and then I quit racing.
And who owned the machine at that time?
It was leased from the Harley factory through Larry Smith from Moundsville, West Virginia, and I took care of all the work on it, motor-wise and everything, for several years. And then I had Dave Eastep, which was the top amateur rider in the country on the regular dirt bikes.
Okay.
That was the first starting of the fairing.
Yeah, the AMA did not allow fairings until 1964. This is one of the first examples of the streamlined machines used at Daytona. One interesting thing to notice as you pass by is to look at those two road racing machines head on, and you can see how quickly the machinery developed. The second one is Cal Rayburn's road racer that he used at the match races in 1972. The whole profile is so much smaller. The width, the height, the whole shape of the fairing is tighter, and you can see how quickly the machinery developed. Before the 1960s, when people wanted to ride their motorcycles off-road, basically what they did was get a great big Harley or Indian, strip the fenders off of it, and do the best they can. There was no such thing as a purpose-built off-road motorcycle. Well, that began to change in the 1950s. This motorcycle on display is a 165 Harley-Davidson that was modified by off-road rider Leroy Winters, and it was the first lightweight motorcycle to win the Jack Pine Enduro. That began the revolution and the development of purpose-built off-road machines. A few interesting points about this bike. This motorcycle did not have a rear suspension. It had a rigid rear end. The rear suspension was a kit that Leroy added to the bike. Also notice the fuel tank, how he sliced it, added a panel just to get more capacity so that he has more gas while he's out on the trail. The founders understood the importance of this, and they made up this little special trophy for Leroy, honoring him as the first man to win the Jack Pine aboard a lightweight motorcycle. They took a cylinder from one of the machines. In this case, it's not the 165, it's the little 125, gold-plated it, and made a little trophy. That's Leroy's actual Jack Pine trophy. Incidentally, one of the other winners of Jack Pine in 1930 was William H. Davidson, the second generation of the family, who was also an accomplished rider. Another, Dot Robinson. Dot and Earl were Michigan motorcycle dealers. Dot won the Jack Pine twice in the sidecar class, which is really quite an incredible feat. There's a photograph of Dot with the sidecar. This exhibit is to focus on famous women who have earned fame aboard Harley-Davidsons. Again, another photograph of Dot. Her Jack Pine trophy, the trophy she won as most popular female rider. We also have a photograph over to the right of Effie Hotchkiss, who in 1915 was the first woman to cross the United States on a motorcycle. She did it on a motorcycle similar to this. This is a 1919 J model with sidecar. She used in 1915. Incidentally, this nice bike belongs to this man right here, Bob McLean. Also on display is the motorcycle, the XR, and the leathers of Tammy Kirk, who was the first woman to qualify and earn championship points in an AMA Dirt Track Grand National race. Also in the Class C exhibit, as you can see, we have the leathers for Mert Lawwell and Cal Rayburn. As we cross over the ramp, we have put along the windows a bar graph that compares Harley-Davidson's longevity to other leading international brands throughout the world. The only company that has even come close to surviving 100 years is the Swedish brand Husqvarna. Started in 1903, the same year as Harley-Davidson. However, Husqvarna did not build motorcycles continuously. They built them off and on, also building weapons and appliances. And in the 80s, Husqvarna was sold to the Italian firm Cagiva. So Harley-Davidson is the only company that has survived 100 years in the full-time manufacture of motorcycles. World War II was a very important period of transition for the motor company. At the beginning of the war, all four of the founders were still at work and in control of the company. At that time, there were 6 sons of Harleys or Davidsons who had gone to work at Harley-Davidson. By the end of the war, only one was left still alive. The other 3 had died, and the second generation of Harleys and Davidsons began to move into the leadership. We've put on display Harley-Davidson's 2 World War II military motorcycles. The most significant was the WLA. Nearly 90,000 of those were manufactured. They were used not only by the U.S. Army, but also sent to Allied nations, and a lot of them went to Russia in the Second World War. This is the rare Harley-Davidson XA. It is pretty much a copy of a BMW R12. Shaft drive, opposed twin. Only about 1,000 of those were made, and it remained experimental and never did go into full large-scale production. This is one of only 60 that were built with the drum wheels and the caisson type tires like you would have on a military trailer. The heroes we've celebrated in this exhibit are Roy Holtz, who in World War I was the first American to enter German territory at the end of the war. He did so aboard a Harley-Davidson. John Harley, the son of William Harley, who became responsible for recruiting and training soldiers to ride the Harley-Davidsons at Fort Knox. And then James Carroll, who liberated a town in Belgium in World War II. And the picture of him shows his WLA draped with flowers that were given to him by the citizens of that town. The motorcycle industry in America went through a lot of change after the Second World War. The economy came back, sales began to improve, the industry really started booming. But the fact is, most of the boom went to British and European brands that were imported after the war. And then the next decade to Japanese brands. And Harley-Davidson was really, in this period, they started losing out. They were losing market share, the business was going down, and it was a hard period. One of the things they did to try to compete in the new market was that they acquired a controlling share of the Italian firm Aramaki. They bought into Aramaki in 1960, and these are examples of some of the machines that came out of that relationship. What it did was give Harley-Davidson the largest, broadest product line in the entire industry. Everything from a little M50 up to their FLH. However, they still were unable to compete with the engineering and the investment of the Japanese. And the relationship ended in 1978 when they sold Aramaki. Aramaki took them into motocross, in which they were not terribly successful, but also into Grand Prix road racing, where Walter Villa won 4 world championships aboard a Harley-Davidson in the mid-1970s. Another great result of the Aramaki relationship was the famous Sprint CR engine, which turned into a tremendous dirt track racing machine and also powered some land speed record motorcycles. Harley-Davidson, after selling Aramaki, withdrew entirely to the heavyweight motorcycle market. They were still declining in market share. The Japanese were beginning to build bigger and better machines. And at last, Harley-Davidson, the board of directors decided that the only way the company was going to survive was to bring in more capital by selling the firm to a larger conglomerate, which they did to American Machine and Foundry in 1969. Behind you is an exhibit about the team that bought the company back from AMF. AMF provided greater manufacturing facilities, they provided more capital, and they enabled the company to build a lot more motorcycles and get back into the market with a greater market share. They also produced worse motorcycles. Quality declined. As a result, AMF Harley-Davidson still to this day have a very bad reputation. But AMF has probably gotten a worse rap than it should have gotten. It saved the company, it put them on the footing where they could survive in a bigger, higher production industry, and the one thing it brought that is priceless was talent. The men that saved the company, with the exception of Willie G. Davidson and Charlie Thompson, were all AMF men, very talented executives who, under the leadership of Von Veals, pooled their own money, borrowed, and bought the company back from AMF.
Well, I'll tell you, I was there when it was in trouble and we were trying to fix that problem. When I retired, it took off and went straight up. The guys have done a fantastic job, guys and ladies as well, have done a fantastic job of building the business and continuing the tradition of quality and the products.
And finally, on the occasion of Harley-Davidson's 85th anniversary in 1988, it became very clear that the company not only had survived, but had regained a position of leadership in the industry. They celebrated that anniversary. All of the executives took new Harley-Davidsons and rode from all points of the compass to Milwaukee that year. And this is the actual motorcycle on which Von Beals celebrated that ride, that he rode to Milwaukee to celebrate the 85th anniversary. Behind you here is the only motorcycle in the exhibit that we encourage people to touch. We have learned from previous exhibits that visitors absolutely love to get their photograph taken aboard a motorcycle. A lot of visitors that come to this museum are not motorcyclists. They don't know how to ride. They'd like to, but they never have. And the idea of climbing aboard a collectible and getting their picture taken, they seem to love that. So people are invited. This is our photo bike. It's a 1965 panhead. People are encouraged to sit on it and have their picture taken. One reason we've selected this machine is it is a perfect example of Harley-Davidson's policy of evolutionary product development. The 65 was the last year of the panhead, but the first year of an electric starter. It also was available in an option of either old hand shift with foot clutch or the foot shift with a hand clutch. Only about a fourth of them built came with the old hand shift, but it could still be acquired that way. The other interesting thing about the machine is it illustrates so well Harley-Davidson's modern successful retro styling. We have put here photographs of the 65 panhead and the 1995 Road King. The styling characteristics are very, very similar. They look, except for the fact that they're totally different in quality and engineering, they look almost like the same motorcycle. Behind me here is an exhibit, a land speed record exhibit. Harley-Davidson throughout its history has had many land speed records dating back to the 1920s. And even today, the current wheel-driven motorcycle land speed record stands at 322 miles an hour, and it was set 12 years ago by Dave Campos in a twin-engine streamliner, which was in fact about twice the size of this one. This is the motorcycle that Cal Rayburn rode in 1970 to set a land speed record of 265 miles an hour. Also is Leo Payne's turnip eater. Turnip was a term that Harley-Davidson riders used to make fun of Triumphs. They called Triumphs turnips. So Leo Payne's machine was called the Turnip Eater. In 1970, he became the first man to exceed 200 miles an hour on an open, conventional motorcycle on that bike. Leo Payne, along with George Smith at S&S Cycle, kind of wrote the book in this country on use of nitromethane, and got tremendous performance out of the Sportster engines. Everything they taught us is now used as standard fare in drag racing and hill climbing. Over here is an exhibit about Buell. Eric Buell was an engineer, a Harley-Davidson employee who left the company in 1982 to create his own firm to build sport bikes. And the one on the left is the RR1200, his first product. The one on the right is the current product, the new Firebolt. Harley-Davidson took an interest in what Eric Buell was doing. Harley-Davidson had no position at all in the performance sport bike market, and they saw it as a way to get involved, and they acquired the company in 1998, 98% of it. Incidentally, the black and red RR1200, which is quite rare, 50 were built? Something like 50 of those were made. This motorcycle belonged to Al Dorman right here with our group. We have put in the storefront what we consider to be some of the unusual or very influential Harley-Davidson models. Let's walk over and I'll tell you about the storefront. One of the oldest dealerships in the United States is A.D. Farrow in Columbus. It was founded in 1912 in Nelsonville, Ohio. The storefront is an exact replica of the storefront of the original A.D. Farrow store. Full scale, exact replica, and that storefront is still there. Of course, it's no longer a motorcycle dealership. In front of it are some of the unusual or influential models. Harley's short little foray into building scooters, the Topper, some Harley-Davidson bicycles, which were built for Harley by Davis Machine Tool Company in Dayton, Ohio. The K model, as a road bike, it was marginally successful, but it resulted in one of the best racing engines Harley-Davidson has ever had. This is the KHK. It's the highest performance model. It is owned by Alice Earhart right here with our group. Not many were built. It was replaced by the 57 Sportster, a fabulously successful motorcycle that really put Harley-Davidson into the street performance business, became the power plant for some of the best drag racing machines of the era. Willie G's famous XLCR Cafe Racer, one of the last models of the little 165. This one is the Scat. The VR 1000 Road Racer, which was discontinued just about 2 years ago. The 1991 Sturgis, which introduced Harley-Davidson's first computer-designed frame, and then of course the spectacular V-Rod. The column that's right here that celebrates dealers. A lot of this exhibit will be funded by contributions from dealers. And once that is complete, the names of those funding companies will be on the opposite side of that column. Harley-Davidson is participating in support of the exhibit by making a matching contribution to contributions that come from dealers. But with these pictures you can see what it used to be like. Little bitty grubby storefronts, and that's the way motorcycling was until just about 25 to 30 years ago. And in fact it was Harley-Davidson that raised the bar in the United States and created modern merchandising standards. Now, one of the unfortunate things for Harley-Davidson was that after the Second World War, its motorcycle became known as the motorcycle of choice for the growing outlaw movement, and it didn't have a very good reputation because of that. We have an exhibit here called On the Road that celebrates some of the people that we think turned that around. Roger Hull, the publisher of Road Rider magazine, Malcolm Forbes, who got tremendous positive headlines by riding Harley-Davidsons and creating a motorcycle club for his rich Wall Street friends who rode Harleys, and coined the term RUB, Rich Urban Bikers. On display is Roger Hull's panhead, which he named Hound Dog, and one of his jackets, and a first edition of Road Rider magazine, which was one of the very influential magazines in the industry. This is an exhibit that we named Power and Glory, where we've combined hill climbing and drag racing. Hill climbing and drag racing in some ways are very different, but they're essentially the same in that the whole idea is to go a straight line as quick as possible from point A to point B, one on a drag strip and one up a hill. Hill climbing is a very old sport, dates back to the teens, was enormously popular during the Depression, and we have on display again from the Daniel Statnikoff collection 2 rare Harley factory hill climbers. Also on display is Tom Reiser's unlimited gas hill climber that we have mounted there on the wall. At that time, they were allowed to use metal paddles on the tires. This is the machine that outlawed that practice because it injured Tom pretty badly one day, and the metal paddles were banned. On display in drag racing is Tom Reiser's Super Sportster, a perfect example of the kind of Sportsters of the period that were so successful on the drag strip. And then behind that is Ray Price's Funny Bike. They were designed to look like distorted street sedans. They were really under the fiberglass, blown out racers. Ray Price was the first one to build a similar motorcycle. It is a drag racing machine, a huge rear tire, but it's designed to look like a Sportster. Sportster forks, fuel tank, even a little fake tail light that looks like a street machine. This bike could do the whole quarter mile smoking its tire with its front wheel off the ground. Wasn't much of an ET machine, but it was enormously popular with the fans, and it launched a whole new class of funny bikes. Another example of a Harley factory hill climber here, this one ridden by Larry Ketzel. And this is exactly as it was last ridden in 1950. All original, it hasn't been touched except a lot of the dirt's been knocked off of it. Finally, our last exhibit on style, in a way celebrates what Harley has become about in the modern era. It honors Willie G. Davidson and Arlen Ness. This is the 1971 FX Super Glide. This motorcycle really kind of put Willie G. on the map. It was his first big contribution as a designer to the company. It came when the company was in pretty bad financial shape, and it opened up an entirely new market that has become the biggest market in motorcycling today, and that's cruisers. Harley-Davidson's biggest sales now are among its FX models, all of which derive from this machine. Also, it taught Harley-Davidson how to expand its model line with a technique of mixing and matching features from different machines to create new models. The FX is probably one of the most influential machines in the company's history, and as I said, Willie G's first great contribution. On display this is not one of Arlen Ness's machines, but a typical chopper of the period. I would invite you to look at the detail on that machine. Look how the tank is fared into the frame. It is a beautifully done machine. The oil tank is inside the rear fender, but it's an example of the kind of creativity that has been stimulated by the brand. A lot of what Willie G does is because he pays attention to the street. He pays attention to what customers are doing to their motorcycles, and then he and the company figure out how to put some of those ideas into serial production. And the result is, what I think probably leads to Harley-Davidson's leadership in sales today, is it is the most customizable motorcycle on the market. Almost no two Harley-Davidsons are alike by the time they get to the street. And as a result, they have tremendous popularity because although they're basically the same, the company only works with 2 engines, now 3 with the V-Rod. They can be made so unique and personalized. A lot of this has come from the influence of Arlen Ness. Out of his work has grown a tremendous, tremendous aftermarket industry that caters to Harley-Davidsons. At the end of the exhibit, we have a timeline that shows company history from 1903 to the present, some of the leading events in that history. Over to your right is a collection of the racing victory posters from the 1970s. You can remember when Psychedelia and Day-Glow inks were popular. Well, there it is. And that is our heroes of Harley-Davidson.